Hey everybody, it's Professor Snart checking in with our Intro to Lit online class, our English 1130 class here. We are making good progress. It may feel like it's going by a little bit more quickly than you're used to, especially if you've never done like an 8-week or even the 12-week, I think goes a little bit quicker. So just getting used to that pace. And obviously by this point, I'm expecting that you are familiar with our due date system, kind of course navigation, that basic orientation stuff that we really wanted to take care of, in week or unit 1, basically. So hopefully no issues there, so you can really focus on the content of the course. So as I'm recording this, it is Tuesday, September 24th. It's a beautiful day outside, which is nice. We are looking at wrapping up our main due date for all the main work in Unit 3, which had us doing a few different things, thinking about still short fiction, but specifically aspects of setting and of character, even though, again, like we said before, it's really hard to disaggregate all those things and treat them purely individually. Then we have a turnaround for any replies that are assigned in that unit, and I'll talk a little bit today about Unit 4. Before I jump into that, though, now that we are a little bit deeper into the course and we've compiled some grades here, I wanted to provide a little overview of grading and some things to think about. Nothing really profound, I would say, but useful stuff to keep in mind, especially, again, as we accumulate more grades as we go through the course. So the first is, it's easy for me to say this, but harder for the student to do, I get that. But our course is out of a nice round 1,000 points. So one of the benefits of that is, as we go through and do various units and exercises, you can fairly easily gauge the relative importance, or what I would say weighting, of each of the assignments that we do. They're all kind of important, but in different ways. So something out of 100 points is clearly going to be weighted more heavily, needs maybe more of your time investment than something that's, say, 50 points or 25 points. But even those numbers, out of a complete 1,000 points, especially if we're talking about things that are out of 50 or out of 25, which is fairly common in our course, I always want you to think about those assignments not just out of themselves, but out of the whole 1,000 for the course. In other words, if we're doing like a discussion board or some activity that's out of like 50 or let's say 25, and you get like a 20 out of 25, if your brain automatically calculates that as like a raw percentage, as a letter grade, and you think, oh my gosh, that's way lower than the grade that I want in the class, that can be really anxiety producing and misleading. And that's what I want you to keep in mind. And that's why I say it's easier for me to tell you than for you to actually do it. Always kind of think of those numbers in terms of that bigger 1,000-point total. In other words, if you, so that the top mark for an assignment, like a 25 out of 25, isn't just meeting the basic requirement, it's really doing that plus going above and beyond. And because it would be next to impossible for me to differentiate like a 22 out of 25 versus a 23 out of 25 in the grand scheme of the 1,000 points for our class, like 1/1000th of a point, or 1 in the whole 1,000, I tend to grade in these like 5 point increments. It's easier for me. It's just easier calculation-wise. It works out better. And I think is actually cleaner and more efficient. But that means that what I need you to think about is, if you get like a 20 out of 25, don't immediately calculate that into some like trauma-inducing number. Just think of it as, okay, I missed 5 out of 1,000 points. Like, you could miss a whole bunch of 5-point increments and still easily get an A in the class. 45 out of 50, even a 40 out of 50. That can feel like, oh my gosh, 80%, a B, barely a B, I'm doing horrible in this class, what can I do? Anxiety producing. But again, it's really like, there can be a fine line between a 40 and a 45. Maybe the replies weren't developed as much as they could be. Maybe there's just some like nuance missing, so it's sort of a generic answer. Again, it's a 5-point increment in that whole scheme of 1,000. So try not to get too caught up, because our course is built not on 1 or 2 huge point assignments. That, I think, is even more anxiety producing. It's built on these much smaller activities that we do consistently. So it really works in your favor, because you have the opportunity to do to have lots of opportunities, right, to do well or to accumulate points. It's not all riding on just a couple of huge things. So keep that 1,000-point structure in mind. If you're consistently getting like 45 out of 50, maybe a 40 out of 50, you just sort of bump up your effort a notch. It doesn't mean a total revamping or overhaul of how you're doing the course. Now, that being said, if you're getting kind of lower than that, 30 out of 50, 35 out of 50, like a 15 out of 25, again, really not a huge point total in the overall scheme of 1,000, but if you keep doing that, right, it will add up. So that's kind of more where you can figure out what's going on, like, are you not doing things correctly? Again, if you're not posting on time by this point, that is going to be an issue. So keep the bigger 1,000-point picture in mind. That's my request to you. And then the other sort of promise that I'll make is that for as a stickler as I might have to be just to maintain the grading integrity of our course about due dates or about not changing grades or like debating them at length with you, I always at the end of our term, no matter what number the machine grading or the calculation system spits out, I always look at every student's actual grades throughout the course of our whole term. So if you just happen to like misunderstand a unit and you really did poorly on it, if you miss a unit entirely, right? These things happen, I get it. So if that kind of stuff is a pattern, and when I look at your grade line and I can see pretty good work, missed work, pretty good, miss, you know, pattern, then that's going to be an issue. If I look at your grade line and it's like pretty good work, really great work, pretty good, really great, oh, missed that one, great, pretty good, etc., I will exempt that missed one entirely from your grade, so it won't really affect you one way or the other. It obviously works in your benefit. But I don't do that until the end because I need to see, just from a sort of ethical grading point of view, is this thing going to be a pattern or is it just a one-off thing that happens to people? I exempt it, we're all cool, but it means that you're going to have to sort of wait on that until the end. It sort of gives you a little impetus to really focus if you happen to have kind of botched things for one, you know, particular unit. Now this, of course, doesn't include major life trauma events that get in the way of you doing stuff. That's a whole separate category that we can deal with on an individual basis. So again, keeping that sort of 1,000-point structure in mind, keeping in mind the fact that I review that whole pattern of a student's grade. It's not just whatever the machine spits out is like whatever you get, right? That's not a good way of grading. That's no grading philosophy. It's, oh, well, the machine says. That's not my philosophy for anything, really, except for like Google Maps. That's a machine I will trust. Anyway, some big picture grading stuff to keep in mind. Let's jump into Unit 4. So this is a pretty interesting one. I've always liked this exercise. It'll have us reading a short story called The Yellow Wallpaper. It's a pretty famous one, so you may have bumped into this one like in high school or in other literature or college contexts. It was published in the late 1890s. It's an American short story, fairly famous author as well. She's a major sort of feminist figure, women's rights figure. But hopefully the way that we're going to tackle this story, even if you've read it before, will give you some interesting new things to think about. So again, the reading assignment, the first one is obvious, the story from our textbook. This takes you to the particular edition of the textbook, so if these links aren't working, it may be that you just have a different edition of the textbook. You can find the story in almost any edition of the Norton Intro to Lit. And then what I'm going to ask you to do is to read or just sort of visually skim across this it's a digital reproduction of the original publication of The Yellow Wallpaper, and I have that open right here. Sometimes it takes a while to open just because it's like a really sort of digitally intense collection that we're getting into. But this is how the Gilman's short story looked when it was first published here, 91, 92, in a journal called or magazine called the New England Magazine. It's actually really fascinating, if you're into such things, to glance through what like a magazine looked like at the turn of the century here in the UK, in America. They kind of looked the same. They are super dense. If you've ever seen a newspaper from that era, your eyes would just go crazy. It's so dense with text. It's almost like trying to compress what we have like in the internet in a few pages of text now. So a totally different era of reading and what people's expectations were for reading. So it's fascinating, but not really what we're talking about here, directly anyway. So you can scroll through, and our activity here is first going to be to work in this shared slide deck. So again, as always, be careful because everyone's in the same space. Kind of mark out a little slide for yourself, make sure your name is on it. And what I'm going to ask you to do here is really just to do some note taking as you're reading, right, our textbook version. What are some main ideas, some main themes going on? That's explained. The assignment itself is explained here. You know, include a few quotes from the story. It's just a great place to compile not just your brainstorming, but you can access others as we do the next assignment. So it's sort of like a group brainstorming space. There's really no wrong answers exactly, but remember that we always want analysis interpretation grounded in evidence from the text. So this isn't your opinion of the story. You liked it, you disliked it, it was really entertaining, it was really boring, it was long, it was short. We're not going for that. We need some analysis here, interpretation. What are the themes going on? How does like a setting work here, for example? And what are some quotes that we can pull to prove our case? So again, it's not just anything goes. But it is your interpretation. So don't like Google the story to find out what it's about and then just rehash that. Don't believe the machine. Okay, so that's our shared brainstorming space. After everyone's done it, we'll have a nice kind of collection of ideas about the story. A quick little quiz, again, helping with reading comprehension, not really important to me in terms of whatever the 10 out of 1,000 points that it's worth. And then the main assignment. So again, sort of a novel approach, I hope here. What I'm going to ask you to do is consider differences between our textbook reprinting, and that's just one of a zillion reprintings of the story, and how the thing actually looked in its original publication. And I'm going to ask you to look for differences. But I want to be really clear here. You're not looking for textual differences of the type that there's like a whole paragraph is missing, or the ending is different, or there's a whole sentence that's been added somewhere along the way. It's really different kinds of differences that we're looking for. And I'm giving you a clue right here in the assignment itself. You can even kind of eyeball some immediate differences between our textbook version and what's presented here. And what I'm going to challenge you to do is to identify some of those differences, right? And then that's where you might want to go back to our shared brainstorming here. How do some of those differences affect the way that you read or understand the story? In other words, how do like the thematic ideas of the story interface or change depending on how the thing is presented? So the fundamental like thesis or proposition I'm giving to you is that we can all claim to have read the same story, whether it's this one or really any other one, but it's a really profound case here. But could you actually argue that depending on the way that the story is presented to us, like our textbook version versus the original publication, or as close as we can get to it in the digital reproduction, that they're really not the same story? Sure, it's the same basic characters, the same basic story arc, but do all the subtleties change, or do many of the subtleties change when we start to discover what might seem like tiny little differences, or maybe they're really obvious differences, but they actually have a real profound, substantial effect on our understanding of themes in the story. They provide some like ironic commentary, almost unintentional commentary. They change the way that we think about characters. The way that the themes that really start to jump out at us can change depending on how it's presented. So again, not massive like the ending is different, or all the character names are different, or something like that. It's a little more subtle than that, although honestly, one of them is not subtle at all. So that's what I'm asking you to stew on for this assignment. Build out a portfolio page, a new portfolio page, call it like Unit 4 yellow wallpaper, whatever, and then use that page to sort of explain the differences that you're discovering. You could work in a Google Doc and then just embed that. You can work right in the page itself, but you really want to make your analysis deep, so it's tied with actual examples. It's tied back to our brainstorming about what's going on in the story. So again, it's sort of like a a tying together of some of the brainstorming stuff, your ideas about the story, your interpretation, and then of course your analysis of those key differences. Always, always, always including direct quotation or visual example to support your ideas. So as always, be sure to publish your portfolio work so it's kind of like official and out there on the web. Post your portfolio URL to the discussion board here. If you happen to work in Google Docs or embed stuff in your portfolio page, make extra sure that those documents are shared correctly, not the portfolio, but the document itself or the slide deck or whatever you happen to be working in. So you have to actively click into the share button and make sure that anyone can view it. Otherwise, you'll be able to see it on your portfolio, but nobody else will. So post that. That's your main work for the unit. And then visiting as many as you want, and then using the reply tool in the discussion board here, replying to the analysis or the portfolio page of at least 2 of your classmates. Okay? So again, maybe a story that you've run into before, but hopefully we're approaching it in a novel and slightly different way. And we're really driving home the point that we can claim to have read the same story, poem, whatever, but in a lot of ways that's like a false equivalency, right? It all depends on the particular version of the thing and how that denies us access or gives us access in different ways to like different understandings of character, theme, all the stuff that's going on there. Okay, so again, grading big picture and then some stuff in Unit 4 here. By all means, be in touch if you have questions or concerns, and I will check in with everybody in a couple days.